From KGW News, this is Straight Talk with Laurel Porter.
Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. As we look ahead to the general election on November 5th, one of the most competitive races in Oregon is the open seat for Attorney General. The race pits Democrat former House Speaker Dan Rayfield against Republican former prosecutor Will Lathrop. Current Attorney General, Democrat Ellen Rosenblum, decided not to run for another term. And Republicans see this as an opportunity to win a statewide office in Oregon for the first time since Dennis Richardson was elected as Secretary of State in 2016. The AG runs what is Oregon's largest law firm, the Oregon Department of Justice, with about 1,400 employees and a two-year budget of close to $800 million. The Oregon Department of Justice has 10 divisions running programs related to child support, charitable activities, district attorney assistance, crime victim compensation, and consumer protection, among other things. The DOJ advocates for and protects all Oregonians, especially the most vulnerable, such as children and seniors. In this episode of Straight Talk, we hear from both candidates vying to be the state's top legal officer, its Attorney General. Dan Rayfield joins us in our next segment. First up, Will Lathrop. Will Lathrop is a 46-year-old Newburgh resident. He's a sixth-generation Oregonian who grew up on a cattle ranch in rural Wallowa County near the town of Joseph in northeast Oregon. He got his law degree from Willamette University College of Law. He says he's not a politician, but a prosecutor and victims advocate. Lathrop spent 9 years as a child sex abuse prosecutor and deputy district attorney in Yamhill County and in Marion County's Special Victims Unit. Most recently, he worked for 8 years at a human rights organization in Africa before returning to Oregon to run for office. He's married to his college sweetheart, and they have an 8-year-old son. I'm pleased to welcome my first guest, Republican candidate for Oregon Attorney General, Will Lathrop. Welcome to Straight Talk. It's nice to have you here.
It is great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, as I mentioned, the Department of Justice, the Attorney General's office, does a lot of things, has a lot of responsibilities. How do you envision your role as Attorney General? What do you want to emphasize, and how might it differ from your opponent?
The Attorney General really is the chief law enforcement officer of this state. It's also the chief child protection officer in the anti-corruption wing of the government. And so my entire background, I've worked both in the state, nationally, and internationally on victim protection, particularly protecting children from violence, exploitation, and abuse, and women from violence as well. And so the role of the Attorney General is really important in taking on organized crime. That's drug trafficking, human trafficking, organized retail theft, all things which are astronomically high in the state of Oregon right now. So one of my first priorities is going to be to make it exceedingly difficult to sell fentanyl and methamphetamines in the state of Oregon, because we all know that there are people making millions of dollars off of really crushing families and communities off of exploiting addiction. So I think probably the big difference between my opponent and I is that my opponent's mostly been in the legislature as a politician, and I've spent my career as law enforcement, both here in the state of Oregon and internationally as well.
When you were overseas, when you'd come home to Oregon, you said you'd be dismayed at what you saw as the decline in Oregon and a decay in law and order, particularly victims protection. So you talked about some of your priorities, taking on fentanyl, drug trafficking. How would you do that? What specifically would you do?
Yeah, so right now we have a very organized criminal element that's come to Oregon that's selling drugs and trafficking human beings and engaging in organized retail theft. And our law enforcement is largely disorganized. The Attorney General plays a central role, kind of an air traffic control role, of getting chiefs of police, sheriffs, and district attorneys across the state on the same page, then plugging into the federal government and Interpol, which can drive cases across national lines. And so my role as the Attorney General is a leadership role. It's building a strategy, sharing information, and starting to make it hard to sell fentanyl and methamphetamine in Oregon. It's what I was doing in human trafficking in West Africa. I was doing something very, very similar. I was very successful in that role, and I plan to do the same thing when I come to Oregon.
Well, let's talk about kids protection. A 5-year class action lawsuit was just settled against Oregon's Department of Human Services, which runs the state's foster care system. For years, DHS has been under intense scrutiny for failing to protect Oregon's most vulnerable children. As Attorney General, what would you do to improve that system and make Oregon children safe?
Yeah, well, DHS has routinely disobeyed court orders and not followed the law, and has housed children or foster children in hotel rooms, and they get heat, they get food, and they get shelter, but they don't get the thing they need the most, which is affection and love and attention. And that's led to several children actually dying under DHS custody this year, and most recently one in Eugene had committed suicide and threatened that he was going to do it for some time. So as the Attorney General, you play a really important role in child protection, and one of those ways is to hold DHS accountable and make sure that they're following the law and we're doing what's in the best interest of children. The posture we've been taking for the last several years is to defend DHS action in court, even when we know it's illegal. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to defend illegal action. I'm going to make DHS follow the law. But we also have several other issues when it comes to child protection that are critical in Oregon right now. And one of those is online sexual exploitation of children. We've seen a huge increase in the amount of tips, cyber tips, that are related to children that are being targeted from predators all over the world. Like, our kids have never been more accessible to people outside our state through phones, computers, video games, and tablets, and we have done, Oregon is almost last in the country at building a safety net and protecting our children from online sexual exploitation. I've worked those cases. I've trained police officers internationally on that. I know how important those cases are and how prevalent they are, and I'm going to lead a charge to push back.
Like much of the rest of the country, Oregon faces a mental health care crisis. We're often listed at the bottom of the barrel when it comes to access to mental health care. Do you see a role for the Oregon Attorney General in how the state approaches mental health care?
You know, there's no silver bullet in our government, and so I'm disappointed with the legislature. I'm disappointed that we don't have enough resources, and there isn't enough there aren't enough treatment facilities for people suffering from mental health, that we've treated our jail system and our streets as our mental institutions. It's not working. Our law isn't working, and I'm disappointed that that hasn't been changed. So there's a role for the Attorney General in the mental health crisis. It's really just to be the ambassador for law enforcement, to be the ambassador for the criminal justice system, to say jails are not where we want to have people with Axis I diagnoses. We want those people to be in treatment where they can get psychotropic medications and they can be well.
You talked about organized crime earlier. There's been an increase in organized retail theft around the state, including in Portland, and we've done stories on it here at KGW, and that can add up to millions of dollars in losses. What would you do as Oregon Attorney General to take on organized crime and cut down on that retail theft?
Yeah, so it's much like human trafficking or drug trafficking. This is an organized crime, and so people can, you probably already know, people can be targeting a Walmart in Wilsonville and then be targeting a Walmart in Gresham, and they could just, and by the time the police show up in one county for that city or for that county, they've already moved on to the next. So there has to be this umbrella. There has to be the statewide approach, and it can't be reactive. These people are organized, and we need to infiltrate their organization and start to get in front of them and be proactively waiting for them when they get to the place they're going next. And we have to arrest them. We have to hold them accountable. You should know, though, that most of the organized retail theft is very symmetrical with the drug trafficking that's happening right now and human trafficking as well. There's almost no separation between those two forms of exploitation.
You've talked about taking on misuse of public funds.
Yeah.
How big of a problem is that in Oregon, and what specifically would you do?
I think it's a really big problem. When I came back, you said I came back in dismay, and it's right. I came back because I was really frustrated at the way we're protecting children in Oregon. I've spent my whole adult life working to protect children from exploitation and abuse and neglect, and to come back in Oregon and to see where we're at ranked in the almost every single category in the country in the bottom 10 is heartbreaking to me. But when I came back, what I didn't realize was how much public misuse of office or public misuse of funds that have started to occur over the last 10 years. Maybe it was before that, I don't know. But one thing that I consistently learn when I go to the neighborhood associations here in Portland, or if I'm traveling to Eastern Oregon, I've been to all 36 counties, so I can say this with authority, is there is a growing distrust for government. And one of the key things is that we'll allocate money to something important, like addiction or homelessness or housing. That money will go to the governor and then to the state agencies after that, and then down to community-based organizations. And when the money's actually audited in these different entities, very frequently the audits will say, $1 million missing here, $5 million unreceipted here, this unaccounted for there. You'll run a story on it, Willamette Week or going Oregon Life, somebody will run a story on it, we'll all be aghast, and then it goes back to the legislature the next year, and instead of allocating $500 million, they say, well, let's allocate $600 million, and the snowball grows. Somebody out there is getting rich, but nobody's actually getting better. And so the Attorney General plays an important role to investigate missing money. It could be negligence, it could be bad accounting or bad receipting, but people have a right to know if it's that or fraud or theft. And my experience as a prosecutor is that if somebody's not watching the till, if it is negligence, if somebody's not watching it, they'll be theft soon enough. And so we need to do a better job of accounting for our money. And I think just generally across the board, Oregonians are thirsty, they're hungry for accountability.
Oregon is considered the most pro-choice state in the nation, and some see the Attorney General as the last line of defense should Congress enact a national abortion ban. Now, you have said this is settled law in Oregon, that your opinion on abortion is irrelevant, but some voters may want more assurance than that. Will you, as Attorney General, if you're elected, would you fight to protect reproductive rights in Oregon?
Yeah. The Attorney General is a law enforcement position. It's not a law creation position. So Attorney General, you have one of two choices. One is you can enforce the law, or two, you can do something illegal. I'm not going to speak for my opponent, but I'm not going to do something, certainly not going to do something illegal. I'm going to enforce the law. I've got 20 years of experience enforcing the law and doing it at a very high level, and I'll do that with abortion rights as well.
Democrats hold all the levers of power in Oregon. Majority, I don't need to tell you that, majorities in both chambers of the legislature, all 5 statewide races. What is it going to take for a Republican to win in the state for the first time since Dennis Richardson in 2016? How are you going to get Democrats to vote for you? Because you're going to need some of them to vote for you.
Laurel, crime, addiction, lawlessness, it's indiscriminate. It doesn't ask you what party you are. Everybody's being victimized by the same thing all across the state. I don't think we're more unified in Oregon than we've been in my entire lifetime, in that everybody's a little bit miserable and they're looking for change. I don't have a political background. I'm not a politician, not whatsoever. I'm just a law enforcement guy. I've done a very good job of enforcing the law in Oregon, nationally and internationally, and I'm going to do that in this position as well. If you want a politician, I would say look at what our politicians have gotten us so far. We are mental health, public schools, our economy, addiction, crime, homelessness. If you point affordable housing, if you point a stick at it in Oregon, we're doing a bad job of it. We have failed leadership and failed parties, so I don't think people should be asking what party are you this party or that party. I think they should be looking for leaders that are experienced, that know how to get something done and make things better. And that's what I do, and that's what I'm going to do.
Well, along those lines, I want to give you about 30 seconds for a final pitch to voters.
Hey, yeah, look, it's no secret that Oregon is suffering from those things: crime, addiction, homelessness. There's no secret that there's this growing distrust for government, and we have to do something new. I represent a dawn of new leadership: moderate, get it done, go to work, fix the problem. Don't bicker about radical politics, just pragmatic leadership. And so I think there's a real opportunity in November to reject old leadership on both parties and start voting for new leaders who have real solutions, real practical experience, and can solve the problems that we're all facing.
Well, Will Lathrop, thank you so much for joining us here on Straight Talk, Republican candidate for Oregon Attorney General.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
And if you'd like to find out more about Will Lathrop, check out his website. It's willathrop.com. And when we come back, we'll meet the Democratic candidate for Oregon Attorney General, Dan Rayfield. We're back in 2 minutes. Welcome back to Straight Talk. I'm Laurel Porter. We're talking with the candidates for Oregon Attorney General. In our first segment, we heard from Republican candidate Will Lathrop. Now it's the Democratic candidate's turn, Dan Rayfield. First, a little bit about him. Rayfield is 45 years old, grew up in Oregon, and attended Tigard High School, then Western Oregon University, getting his law degree from Willamette University's College of Law. He's a personal injury lawyer, and since 2015, Rayfield served as state representative for Oregon House District 16, which includes Corvallis, Philomath, and Oregon State University. In 2022, he was elected by his colleagues to be Speaker of the House. He is credited with being a key driver behind the compromise legislation that overturned parts of Measure 110 and recriminalized drug possession, while also encouraging counties to offer deflection treatment programs as an alternative to jail. Rayfield lives in Corvallis with his wife Amanda and son Adam. Welcome to my guest, Democratic candidate for Oregon Attorney General, Dan Rayfield. Welcome back to Straight Talk.
Very good to see you. Thank you for having me.
And your first time being here in the studio, because last time we were in Salem.
It is. When I stopped being Speaker, you didn't call, you didn't write. I had to run for Attorney General to get you to invite me.
Well,
here.
We're glad you're here. You know, your opponent criticizes you as being a career politician, and he emphasizes his experience as a prosecutor. Why do you think your experience makes you the better choice for Attorney General, and what would be your top priority?
Yeah, I mean, that's political fodder that, people use in this world. For the last 18 years, I've been an attorney representing individuals against large corporations, consumer cases. That's what I've done in my personal life for the last 10 years. I've been in the legislature, building a reputation that I really believe that our elected officials can solve our community's greatest challenges. And during the last 2 years as Speaker of the Oregon House, we really did that. And I want to take that same style of leadership into the Attorney General's office, where the things that I really want to focus on is keeping communities safe, building off of the work that I did in the legislature, where we brought Republicans, Democrats, and law enforcement together to really, give the tools to law enforcement to get the hard drugs off the streets. I want to do that in the Attorney General's office and combat drug delivery across this state. I really think it's important that at the Attorney General's office, you are the attorney for all Oregonians, and we need to expand the work that we do to protect consumers and seniors from things like fly-by-night scams that come in and out of our communities, predatory lending, and things along those lines. And then finally, and this is really important, is that we have an Attorney General that matches the values of all Oregonians. Now more than ever, we have national threats to our values, whether it's abortion rights, which are going on right now, or whether it's our environmental laws. We need an Attorney General that is the backstop for our values and will fight for Oregon values, and that's something that I'm excited to do in this role.
We're going to break down some of those priorities. Let's start with gun violence. A group of Oregon students has started circulating a petition that's already gathered hundreds of signatures. It calls for real change to prevent school shootings. Meanwhile, the state's involved in litigation and trying to implement Measure 114. And to remind folks, that was the 2022 voter-approved measure that aims to reduce gun violence. And now it's blocked in the courts. As Attorney General, how important is it to you to implement Measure 114? And is there any other action you would take to try to protect Oregon students?
This is a wonderful, critical difference between my opponent and myself. I think both of us, we all care about reducing gun violence in the community. I think when I grew up, it wasn't something that you thought about. My son, as he goes to school, has not known a world in which gun violence is not commonplace. And that is a problem, and we need change. As Speaker of the Oregon House, we brought people together to pass ghost gun legislation in partnership with the current Attorney General. I want to continue to use this soapbox to advocate for policies that will keep our communities safe. At the same time, it is incredibly important that the Attorney General defend what voters passed. And right now you have people challenging the laws in courts that we have passed as voters. The Attorney General's responsibility is to defend the constitutionality of what the voters pass. My opponent, on the other hand, is endorsed by a conservative gun group in those dynamics. And so you're going to have to make these decisions. Nationally, most recently, there were 26 Republican attorneys general that have attacked the ghost gun legislation, or the legislation that the actual Biden administration has tried to put into place. I will be there to defend our values here in Oregon, especially when it comes to gun violence.
And you mentioned the environment, which is really important, fighting climate change to a lot of Oregonians. What would you do? How much would you focus on protecting, safeguarding Oregon's environment?
So think about it in two ways. One of it is thinking about how we're protecting our state on a whole. Our current Attorney General has had to file lawsuits against companies like Monsanto, where there's forever pesticides or forever chemicals in our community. And instead of us paying for that out of our taxpayer dollars, the Attorney General's role and responsibility is to hold people accountable, and so that we don't have to pay for it, and the folks that have caused the harm actually mitigate and help clean that up. That is a critical role that I will continue. It is also important to defend our values. I think it's about 16 Republican attorneys general have filed a lawsuit to prevent the ability of states to set lower emission controls on their automotive vehicles than the EPA has set. That's something that again, here in Oregon, where the environment is incredibly important to all of us, I will be there to defend those values.
And on reproductive rights, Oregon lawmakers passed the Reproductive Health Equity Act in 2017, which codified abortion rights in Oregon. But some people are concerned that the next Congress might try to pass a national abortion ban. As Attorney General, what would you do to try to protect reproductive rights in Oregon?
Yeah, and as Speaker of the Oregon House, we brought people together and passed one of the most forward-thinking abortion rights laws in the nation. And so we have good laws on the books right now. The threat coming is that if that national abortion ban passes, there is a conflict. There's a conflict between the federal law and the state law. The way this plays out nationally is that Republican attorneys general will sit in one corner and argue for the enforcement of the federal abortion ban. It will be the responsibility of myself and other attorneys general in states like ours to defend the laws that we have the books against the national abortion ban. And I think that's a pretty big difference between myself and my opponent.
You know, it's important, especially as we head towards the election, that people have confidence in a free and fair election system. But a recent audit revealed more than 1,250 people in Oregon were registered improperly, potential non-citizens, to vote by the DMV's automatic voter registration system. What role would you play to try to uphold Oregon election laws and to ensure that Oregon's elections are free and fair?
What has happened that has gone on is unacceptable. I am further frustrated that it took the Willamette week to find some of the mistakes. I think that adds insult to injury. The integrity of our election systems absolutely matter. In this space, I think it is incredibly important that an investigation continues into the situation. I support the governor's pause of the automatic voter registration, and we need to take steps to rebuild credibility in our election systems moving forward. If through the investigation process on the Attorney General side of things, if we find that people willfully violated the law in casting a ballot when they knew they should not have, there also needs to be accountability in that space as well.
You touched on this a little bit about national lawsuits. During the Trump administration, Attorney General Ellen Rosenblum joined other Democratic attorneys general in suing the White House numerous times, trying to thwart the president's agenda and protect what she called and what you've called here today Oregon values. If Donald Trump wins in November, would you continue that pursuit? And how do you see yourself working with other attorneys general?
Yeah, first off, when I was in my time as Speaker, one of the things that I really tried to do was show that Democrats and Republicans can work together for a common value and solve some of these big challenges. I want to do the same thing in the Attorney General's office, where you partner with Republican Attorneys General as well as Democratic Attorneys General to really make common progress on things that the values that we all share. Now, are there going to be times, if there is a president that is elected that does not share our values and is implementing, whether they're administrative rules or they're trying to change laws that are in conflict with our values, will you defend Oregon's values? Absolutely. What we saw during the 4 years of the Trump administration was that Republican attorneys general were there trying to enforce his agenda across this nation, and then you had the Democratic attorneys general trying to just tread water and protect the values that we have in our state. And so I do find that should that come to pass, it's going to be a very important role of any attorney general in any state.
I'm just checking the time. We have about a minute. I want to ask you a question before I give you a time to have a final pitch to voters. You've talked about a working families unit that you want to start that. What would that be? Why is that important to you?
One of the big reasons that I'm a Democrat is the wealth inequality in our society. And in the Attorney General's office, I'd like to create a working families unit that focuses on that value. A unit of attorneys and investigators that goes after wage theft, misclassification of workers, child labor violations. Those are things that are really going on in our state right now. And that's one of the really important units that I would love to start to then ping at that value and make a difference for working families in our state.
I can give you about a minute or so for a final message to voters tonight.
I just want to thank everybody for listening in tonight. Again, my name is Dan Rayfield, and I'm running for Attorney General as a Democratic candidate. The things that matter most to me and what I truly believe is that we solve our challenges better when we do it together. And that's what I did in the Oregon legislature, and I want to do that as your next Attorney General. The three things that I'm incredibly focused on is keeping communities safe, and that means tackling our drug delivery issues, human trafficking, internet crimes against children. The other thing I think is incredibly important for your Attorney General is to be the attorney for all Oregonians. And that means protecting seniors, consumers, and working families from things like fly-by-night scams, predatory lending. And then finally, you need an Attorney General that matches our values in the state. Someone who is going to stand up when our reproductive rights are being challenged, someone who's going to stand up when our environmental laws are being challenged. And I look forward to doing that as your next Attorney General.
And I just wanted, before we go, you mentioned to me just before we started that you're in a polka band. Can you quickly tell us about that? What's it called again?
So my dad and some others were in a band called the Polkaticians. I played the tuba in this band. And the next time when anybody watches the Starlight Parade here in downtown Portland, you'll see us. We just concluded the season, and I regret to let you know I was unable to play this season because of the campaign. I will be back next year.
We'll be watching for it. Thank you, Dan Rayfield. Check out Dan Rayfield's website for more information at danrayfield.com. And we hope you'll join us next week when my guests are the candidates for Congress in Washington's 3rd District, Democratic Representative Marie Gluesenkamp Perez and Republican challenger Joe Kent. We'll see you next week for Straight Talk.